In this video, I want to talk a bit about driving kind of disconnected UI with data. So the example I'm going to use here is this top level menu. So I'm working with the version of the app where we've got routing set up. You can load the app. Say I'm going to start on the settings screen and it takes me to the settings screen. I've got the session set up so that if I try to go to settings, and it sees I'm not logged in, it takes me to log in, then I can log in, etc. So this is where I'm at. So what I want to do is I want to change this menu so that the individual screens can add things to the menu up here. But this menu is, of course, rendered higher up in the UI tree than, right, it's up here on the root component, and these subcomponents, if they want to add or remove things from the menu, those are sort of DOM-based things. They need some sort of actions. And we've seen that we don't want to put lambdas in our app state. We don't use the typical JavaScript way of saying, when I click on this, here's the lambda. Right? We do that at the DOM level, like with an on click. But in terms of keeping track of things in state, we want this to be pure closure data in here that we can inspect and look at, etc. So the trick, really, the central trick, is to remember that mutations themselves are data that can be stored in app state. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a component to stand for these items that I want to appear in a menu. And I think I'm actually going to create let's create a UI package here, and then let's create a dynamic menu namespace. Let's just kind of start that way. Okay, so I really want a component called dynamic menu, and the dynamic menu is going to have dynamic menu items, and then it's going to have a constant ident. Let me go ahead and pull that little bit in here. And I'm just going to give it if I could type, just a place in app state where it'll live always. And I'm going to go ahead and give this initial state so it'll have something. Dynamic menu items has no items. Okay, so then what do I want it to render? This doesn't need a key function because there's only going to be one of them. So over here in the root, what I want this essentially to render is a fragment of items. So that's what the body of this thing is going to be. So this is going to be a comp fragment of whatever the items are. Okay, now what are the items? These are things I want to store in app state. So I can just invent data representations for these. So one of the things that I want here is just a link. So let's say, okay, I want a link, and a link's going to have a title, it's going to have a mutation to run, and it's going to have kind of, I think we can make the mutation params themselves optional. And this is just going to say, all right, well, my type is a link, and my mutation is mutation, and my mutation params. So that's one kind of thing I might want to put up there. The other thing I might want to put up there is a drop-down, right? I might want a drop-down menu. And that's going to have a title and then some arbitrary number of items. And so that's going to be drop down, and then it's going to have items, which is just, we'll make that a vec of items. And right, so I'm just kind of building out what I might want this to look like in terms of straight up data. And then let's see, now these items need to have And these are going to look very similar to link, I think, because right, they're just drop down. And I'm not going to do nested drop downs at the moment. I'm just going to say this is a drop down item, and a drop down item doesn't really have a type, but it does have a label. Which I should have stored in all of these. Okay, so my recursive call goes to the right thing, recursive call goes to the right thing, title mutation, optional params. Okay, and then I'll make a menu that has any number of items. And so then this is just going to be a dynamic menu items with a vec of the items. Okay, so let's just kind of try out what this generally looks like by just hard coding this in here. So let's say we want a root dynamic menu that's going to be let's see now. Okay, and then we should be able to say the initial state root dynamic menu is, right, remember this is a shorthand here, so this is actually going to call get initial state on that guy and put it in state. And then down here, let's comment this out for a moment, and let's say dynamic menu slash UI dynamic menu of dynamic menu, which now up here, root keys dynamic menu. Okay, so we'll reload that so we get our initial state. And of course, we should get component ID, yeah, dynamic menu in here now, and the items are empty. So let's go over here, and just to test it real quick, we could say, all right, I want I want the initial state to be a menu with a link A that does some mutation. And what did I do? Oh, this guy is supposed to have an argument. Okay, so now if I reload that, did I render them? I did not render them. Okay, so now I need something to actually render these things. So I'm going to map, let's just be kind of simple here. Type, label, mutation, mutation, params. All right, if it's a link, then I'm going to make a DOM div. What were they over here in root? They were a div item with a div content. Make sure I've got my state here. Dynamic menu items is a vector. The individual items have type link, and they have a label. For the moment, I'm just going to do both types of entries the same. Oh, did I pass my... I did. My initial state has the initial state. I'm logged in. So at this point, I would expect things to be rendering. So when logged in, render the dynamic menu, which renders the fragment. Oh, helps if we actually put the items in the... There we go. And now on a link, if I say okay, now I'm going to say list here because I want to use the literal mutation as a symbol inside of a list, followed by the optional mutation params. I don't think there's... Well, somebody could explicitly set them to nil, so I don't want to pass nil there. So now you can see if I go over here in the console and clear this up, I can click on A or B, and you see it's trying to run the mutation I've told it, even though I've not put that mutation in anywhere. So hopefully you could see, pretty quickly I can throw together something. Let me grab these three requires and bring them over here. Let's change... let's make a drop down called reports, and inside of reports, drop down item, sales, whatever, something like that. So then if it's not a link, it must be a drop down, and so if it's a drop down, and these are just all I'm doing here is duplicating essentially what Semantic UI React wants. So I make a drop down with item true. This means item true in JSX, or item is equal to something. Text gets the label I want on the menu itself. Right, I'm trying to make one of these, and then I make a drop down menu that contains drop down items, and in my wrappers for Semantic UI, those get pulled out that way, and then I can directly do them this way. So I need a drop down menu, and then you always need props for the Semantic UI wrappers. So then I can say UI drop down item, and it needs no props. And then the drop down item let's go ahead and make that a function so we can destructure. So this is over the items. Yeah, it's just items. Well, we could just say items and destructure it. And so then the item, it gets the label. Right, we could pull the label out that way. And reload. And now I have something that's rendering those out. And then, of course, on the drop-down items, I should be able to do the same sort of thing. Right, so the drop-down item has a label. It has a mutation, mutation params. Oh, sorry, this one doesn't need a type. Just label mutation params. Spell it right. And so this is the same thing as what I had here. So now if I clear that, it's trying to show the sales report, trying to show the attendance report. So you can see I can very quickly come up with this thing that I can now embed in the root of my app and have it represent some particular menu. Now I might want these sort of kind of routing concerns, and the way I've done these at the moment is with pushing, but I also have this route to mutation I can call to take me to a particular path. And that's just pushy set token. So I'm going to have to tinker a little bit there. Well, I guess I can call that from a mutation. So in my dynamic menu or somewhere else, maybe in routing, right? I could define a mutation just for mutation purposes. And I can pretty much avoid env here because I'm just going to do this side affecting top level thing. But now I have an app routing route to mutation. Okay, so now I could go back to saying I want home and settings, but then I want the R route to mutation, and what did I say I wanted on that? Route string. And so now I should be able to reconstruct a working routing system along with some additional drop-downs. So now that I've got this basic system, well, the first thing I can do is I can say, you know what, I don't really want initial state coded here unless someone actually tries to use it, in which case I don't know what the menu item should be. And so then over in my client, my initial state for the dynamic menu I think that was it. Yeah, route string. And I can no longer use, I can't mix the two. Alright, so now I should be back to where I started at the beginning of the video. I've got a menu. Okay, so now I can do fun things like, well, maybe the settings screen, when I go there, it wants to set a different menu or perhaps add to the menu. And of course, there's a bit more, interesting kind of coding kinds of things I could do here. But let's say, oops, wrong. We could actually, well, we could do all sorts of things, but let's just do it this way. Alright, so all we have to do to set our menu now, oops, is put it in state. Oh wait, we're gonna pass the actual menu in. So if I associate that guy into the correct place and say that the dynamic menu has, oh, actually I can just say the dynamic menu items has changed. That's a query prop. Then now over here in the client, I could do things like oh, and I probably should not put a bang on that one because it's a mutation, so it doesn't actually side effect. The system side effects when it uses it, but here it doesn't side effect. And so I could grab this menu, and again, this is where I can have this dynamic thing happen where additional menu items can show up. So this is just an example of, if you go and look now at the component by ID, the dynamic menu, you can see that these individual items are just storing, the symbol to the mutation and the parameters to pass to that mutation, and I can just assemble those into the actual code of that component itself. So this is a way of driving kind of remote UI through data. And this primarily relies on the fact that you know what to render based on the data. So there's some sort of dispatch, right? This could be a multi-method. This could be an if statement, a case statement, whatever kind of works for this particular kind of thing. And of course, we could expand this example to be a lot more interesting by having kind of a fixed set of menu items and then maybe something that's dynamic after it. A couple of different ways we could do that. I'm sure you can think of them. For example, we could hard code these as items and then have the fragment dynamic menu show kind of to the right of those and be coded separately from those. Or we could have some, setting and dynamic menu that's like the base set that always shows, etc. But the primary concept is just how simple it is to code up things like this that are pure data that then end up affecting your UI in whatever way you want.